who we're in community with tonight. So as we're waiting to start here with Reverend Jake kicking us off, go to gallery view and just see everyone who we're in community with tonight as we're working to build anti-racist power tonight for racial justice.
Okay, we'll be starting in about one more minute. Continue as you're coming in, continue to introduce yourself there in the chat box, where you're at, what you're hoping for in this hour together. We'll start in about a minute. Okay, well, I'll get us started here. Thank you again for showing up, for coming together like this. My name is Jake Morrill. I'm one of the ministers at the Oak Ridge Unitarian Universalist Church in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And I'll introduce other folks in just a moment, but this is a heartbreaking week. It's a week of a lot of heaviness and sorrow, of anger, of grief and despair. And it's a week that we've seen before in this country. It's a week like many weeks in the history of this country. And maybe I'm not alone, in seeing the videos from New York out of New York Central Park on Monday morning. And, me wanting to point a finger and to say, that's not like me, but instead having to understand and to recognize that the poison of racism is within me as well, and that it's not enough for me to shake my head or to put a post on Facebook, but I need to, if I'm to be about the beloved community, if I'm to be about dismantling racism, I need to be looking for resources. I need to be looking for community. I need to be listening to what my siblings of color are asking. And it may be that others have been in that place this week too, of looking for resources, looking for leading, looking for grounding, looking for reflection and perspective. I'm so grateful to the three people who agreed to lead us tonight. They are some of the people I admire most, and especially in this work. Meg Riley, who you'll hear from in a moment, the Reverend Meg Riley, is Senior Minister of the Church of the Larger Fellowship. She's got years of trust building, solidarity, and effective public witness behind her. She's a mentor to many, just connected in community and with organizations in a powerful way. Chris Crass is an anti-racist educator, author, and trainer, has written 2 books, Towards Collective Liberation and Towards the Other America. So glad Chris is here with us as well. And Reverend Ashley Horan, who's the organizing strategy director for the Unitarian Universalist Association, with a background of 5 years as the executive director with the Minnesota UU Social Justice Alliance, years as core staff with the beloved Conversations program. Lots of wisdom here with these 3 leaders tonight. I'm grateful that they have agreed to come here, knowing that this has been a full week for them, a week where they've been crying with loved ones, and also knowing that this is a time to to facilitate some reflection from the rest of us. So Meg Riley is in Minneapolis herself, and she's going to just share with us um, from Minneapolis some thoughts and some perspective. Meg?
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm really delighted to see you white people. We need each other now, and we need each other, as the name of this says, to really deepen in commitment and love. I am in Minneapolis, as I see many beloveds' names who are in the Twin Cities. I'm glad you're all here. It means a lot to see each other right now. I'm also getting texts from my 23-year-old who is out at the demonstrations, which are all over the Twin Cities right now. I just said nothing much is happening right now. And that's good. I feel like I lit a chalice to gather with you. And I want to invite all of us as we enter this painful conversation to remember to breathe. Oh, we have this amazing thing we can do of inhaling and exhaling. And sometimes I forget when I'm anxious. And and I wanted to say, this is also streaming on YouTube. And I hear that this room may be full at 100. So if you know people who can't get on, you can also watch it on the CLF YouTube channel, which maybe Tanner, you could put into the chat, or maybe it's already there. But I just wanted to say that because I don't want anybody to feel like they can't be here tonight. There's plenty of space over there. Anyway, I was just saying that remembering to breathe can really connect us to one another. We can realize that though we are far apart geographically, we are close in breath, that we are all breathing one breath. And if this pandemic has taught us anything in ourselves, it is how profoundly interdependent we are, how the interdependent web is not just a metaphor, it is absolute deepest reality, that we are connected to one another at the most profound level of life and death and breath. And so I invite you into that knowledge with your breath, that your breath connects you to all other living beings. And I invite you into your heart with your breath. I invite you to breathe into your heart. For me, I breathe into the mother's heart, the heart of all of the mothers right now who, like me, are scared for young people again, who are scared of police violence and brutality against our children again. And it connecting my breath to those other mothers and all of the people who love the young ones who are most endangered by this world that we live in, who are growing up into a world which tells them day after day that they and their very breath is expendable. And I invite you to breathe into the yearning that all of those children, and there are no other people's children, that all of those young people are safe. That yearning, which we know is not true for so many, but the yearning we have is real. The safety is not there. And breathe into connection to resistance, resistance to tyranny, resistance to oppression, resistance to all that tries to take life away, all that kills us. Breathe into the interdependence of us all. We know that white supremacy separates us. It is a soul sickness, as Toni Morrison tells us. It sickens our souls because we believe that as white people, we are separate, we are superior, that we know more. Breathe into the humility of knowing how deeply, deeply, profoundly we do not know. We do not know. I pray that we remember who we are when we are connected in this deep place, that we remember how much we need each other to survive and to be liberated. None of us is liberated unless all of us are liberated. We pray for humility. We pray for the willingness to hear truth, even when the truth is devastatingly painful. We pray for clarity, that the lies we've been taught may fall away and leave us holding pain and truth. And may the truth be the truth that sets us free. I'm so glad to be here with you, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Meg. And thank you so much to all of you who are here, who are on the Zoom call, who are on the YouTube watching live. So imagine that we've already had a long conversation about the history of white supremacy in this country, about enslavement, about colonization, about the exploitation of Asian workers, denied citizenship, exploited as workers, anti-Asian racism right now. Imagine that we've had a conversation about systemic white privilege, about the ways that whiteness works to create economic and political opportunities that are not equally shared amongst all white people, but opportunities for white people to access democratic rights that are systematically denied to Black people in particular and to people of color. And now, imagine that you've heard this phrase, white fragility. White fragility, the inability for white people to meaningfully engage in healthy discussion of race, of racism, and of white supremacy. And so now, this is the time in our space that we have together. This is a space of creating white anti-racist resilience, white anti-racist courage, white anti-racist culture, white anti-racist values. Because white fragility is what white supremacy wants all white people to exist in. For white people to either be consciously participating as white supremacists, consciously white supremacists, choosing white supremacy, or for white people to be in denial of racism, to be in denial of how systemic it is, how brutal it is day in and day out, and for white people to be ineffective in working for racial justice. So white supremacy does not want a space like this, one, to exist, and two, to in any way be effective. It wants us to shut down. It wants us to go to a place for the people on this call. It wants people on this call to say, no, I'm a good person. I'm not racist. As opposed to anti-racist spaces like this for white people to say, it's not about being an individual good white person. It's about developing my individual and collective capacity to end white supremacy, to work for racial justice in my congregation, in my workplace, in my community, in my family, in my friend network. It is not a question of, am I racist or am I not racist, but am I actively choosing, am I actively participating in efforts, organized efforts, individual efforts, congregational efforts, movement efforts to work for racial justice and end the nightmare of white supremacy that takes and devours and murders life in communities of color while systematically poisoning the hearts and souls of white people to either be conscious or unconscious soldiers of white supremacy. And to step back for a minute, it is crucial that we remember that yet there is systemic violence and oppression of white supremacy directed against people of color. There is systemic privilege granted to white people in this society, and there is ruling class power. The power to make the rules by which the rest of us live, a power that defines laws, policy, culture, corporate power, institutional power, political power. And that white supremacy is not something that emerged naturally because people just don't like to be around people that don't look like them. In fact, history has shown over and over and over again that people have come together across various things that we would call differences now and have built community, have formed family, have formed friendship networks, and that white supremacy was so needed by those with ruling class power, either those who maintained the plantations and the slave system, or those who needed the slave system to run the textile mills in New England, or to build an economy in this new world based off of slavery in every part. And that white supremacy was used to divide indentured European servants and enslaved Africans, and to create anti-indigenous sentiment amongst European people against indigenous peoples, because enslaved African people, indentured Europeans, and indigenous people on this continent were in fact forming community, forming bonds, and resisting. And so we have to always remember that white supremacy whispers words of active participation or just sleepwalking, unconscious participation, of denial, of, but I'm a good person, of, well, I don't know how to talk about race, and so I'm just not going to do it at all. White supremacy has actively been working for hundreds of years to get white people to act in solidarity with a whiteness that is fundamentally anti-Black, fundamentally anti-people of color, so that white people, rather than uniting with people of color for economic justice, for multiracial democracy, that white people are united to a white supremacy that says, this is my country. Whiteness, this is my space. Whether you coming into the park in New York City, this is my space. Whether the white guy that was just videotaped in a gym in Minneapolis questioning whether or not the black men in the gym actually were tenants as well as him in the same building. Whiteness is this is my space, this is my country, and I am sanctioned culturally and politically to do whatever I want to you to maintain white supremacy. And so we have to remember that white supremacy is language, is behavior, but it's culturally, politically, and economically systemic. And its primary intent is to get white people to embrace anti-Blackness as fundamental to their idea of who they are as white people. The minstrel show was about teaching European Americans how to become white, work yourself to death at the factory, fight other people's wars as soldiers, be individualistic, perfectionist culture, take out your anger and your violence through depression, alcoholism, drug abuse, domestic violence at home, and hate Black people who you see as paternalistically lazy, criminals, predators, on and on and on. And so this way that white supremacy operates, we have to remember that it's systemic, that it wants to divide us, and that it's actively working. And so we have to regularly make choices about being anti-racist. It's not like I'm now anti-racist. It's that anti-Blackness and white supremacy are being silently and sometimes loudly whispered into our ears and reflected in the culture and the political and economic reality that we live in. And so we have to actively choose to be anti-racist over and over and over again in how we show up, and how we participate in public protests, and how we participate in being publicly white anti-racist proactively, not waiting for racism to be spoken, but proactively speaking about racial justice values in white communities. Because I refuse to have Trump, the Ku Klux Klan, and the neo-Nazis be the white people who speak about race in white communities. When I first started doing white anti-racist organizing and trying to bring white people together to have conversations like this, people said, well, that sounds like a Klan meeting because only the Klan brings white people together to talk about race. And I said, that's exactly the problem. If it's the Klan that brings white people together to talk about race, if it's the Klan that is organizing the GOP and Trump and all of these forces, then we as white anti-racists have to actively, proactively bring racial justice values, culture, and participation in white communities. I'm going to pass it over to Reverend Ashley, and we're just doing a little bit of political framing here before we then go into some small groups to talk with each other. And then at the end, there's going to be some action steps and a spiritual ritual of anti-racist resilience. Because it's not enough to just be white people who are trying to not be racist. That's crucial. That is crucial. We need more and more white people to try to not be racist. But we also need white anti-racists to try to be more and more effective, more and more engaging in white communities, to organize more and more white folks into racial justice, into multiracial movements for liberation, and away from the death culture of white supremacy. And so with that, I'm going to pass this over to Reverend Ashley, who's going to help us go deeper.
Hi, everybody. My coworker here is my 3-month-old daughter who is with me tonight. So you might hear some sounds from her in the background. She's trying to take a nap and have a snack here. So I want to talk a little bit about this week and this political moment this month. Because I think one of the other ways that white supremacy works is to erase from our perception the deep connections between things that are happening all over the place. So just this week, we've seen the case in Central Park. We've seen the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and we are still living in the midst of a global pandemic in which it is not coincidental that we're watching reopenings of states, in particular states that have conservative governments and that are aligned with the line of thinking that's about individual rights over collective well-being. And so one thing that I want for us as white people to be able to begin to do or to continue doing is drawing the connections between these things clearly, loudly, across time and across space. One of the characteristics of white supremacy culture is it tends to be very linear and very atomized. And so we don't necessarily see the way that these things spiral through time across space. So Central Park, for example, we saw a incredibly clear visual of the weaponization of whiteness, in particular the weaponization of white womanhood against Black men, of specific Black men. And it was caught on video and went viral. And then in Minneapolis this week, we saw, again, caught on tape, the literal murder of a Black man, George Floyd, by a police officer. Obviously, those two scenarios had very different outcomes, thankfully. And the case in Central Park has become very much a topic of discussion in the middle of all of this. And then I think attention has shifted very quickly toward George Floyd. One of the things that I want to draw that connection to is that what happened with the Central Park case could so easily have been the outcome that happened in Minneapolis, right? We saw the variety of things that can happen in a case like that. And the conversation has turned to individual actors, right? And I'm losing names right now. I am not as fresh as I could be tonight. Is it Amy Cooper? Is that right? I'm saying it wrong. Somebody can help me in the chat. But her first response when she was interviewed on CNN was that she said, "I'm not a racist," right? It becomes a conversation about individual people. And here in Minneapolis, where I also live, it's becoming a conversation about the individual police officer who killed George Floyd. it's also becoming a conversation about the ways that people react to those things, right? So I'm sure that you are all reading news stories about quote unquote looting and rioting that's happening in Minneapolis right now. What people are not talking about is the history of the weaponization of white womanhood, the way that police have historically been set up in police forces across the country to protect white individuals, white property. And we haven't talked about the connection between those two things all the time. Now, the fact that this is happening in the midst of a global pandemic is also incredibly relevant, right? This is not, at the early phases of COVID, folks were talking about this as a great equalizer, right? We're all equally susceptible to the virus. And then very quickly, we began seeing the racial disparities about this, particularly in the Black community, right? We know that Black folks are dying at exponentially higher proportions than white folks are of this virus. And it's not because of some biological difference between us. It's about the way that the system is set up to protect white life, white property, right? And so the compounding pieces of health disparities that are pre-existing, of lack of access to resources, of poverty, of disparities in health outcomes and access to medical care are things that we also need to be talking about. So many of you already are seeing those connections. And what I want us to be able to do is to be out there in relationship with people in our communities, in our pulpits, on social media, in our workplaces, drawing those connections, having conversations about the complex and nuanced ways that this is all working together, right? That actually the system isn't broken, the system is working exactly as it is supposed to. Now, in order for us to have those conversations, we need a deep well of spiritual resiliency, a huge dose of humility, and some real concrete action steps. And so I'm excited for the part of our conversation tonight where we're talking about ways that white folks in these moments can actually be making a difference. And I think before that, we're going to start with a little bit of discussion about what you're already doing and ways that you're committing to be in the struggle. And then we're going to make some recommendations about things that folks can be doing to be engaged in this moment. So I'm going to turn it back to Chris.
Thank you so much, Reverend Ashley. And with all that, thinking about all the different things that have been going on, whether Ahmaud Arbery jogging in suburban Georgia, being murdered, men going after him in their trucks with guns, Breonna Taylor, a young Black woman in her mid-20s who was murdered by the police here in Louisville just a few weeks ago, a no-knock warrant where they were looking for someone who didn't live there, was not connected to her. There's a whole investigation into how this warrant even came about, but nonetheless, in the no-knock warrant breaking into her house, she was shot and killed. So over and over and over again, all that is happening and putting it into systemic perspective like Reverend Ashley laid out for us. What we're going to do is we're going to go into small groups now. For those of you who are on Zoom, you're going to be broken up into small groups of 3. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, Reverend Jake is going to help with some just reflection and opportunity for you just to be thinking about it or discussing it with people who you might be watching this with, or in whatever way is best for you. But in the small groups on Zoom or on your own or with those who you're watching with on YouTube, the question for us is why I'm committed to anti-racism and what it means to me. And the reason for this question is, again, to help us practice. Again, for some of us on this call, this may be something that we feel we talk about it. This is a passion. This is our heart, our soul is in racial justice work. For some of us, it might be, you know what, you saw the news, you saw a video, and this is 24 hours after having had a moment of, oh my God, I cannot believe what is happening in this country, and I want to figure this out. Wherever you're at on your journey around anti-racism, it is beautiful to have you here, because we need all of you wherever you're at, and to be bringing more and more white people into this work, to be able to think more and be able to articulate, to be able to share with those in your life why I'm an anti-racist and what it means to me. not in a way that means I'm anti-racist and so therefore I'm better than everyone. I'm done with this work. This doesn't apply to me, but why I'm committed to making active choices to end white supremacy, to work for racial justice, and what that means to me. So we're going to go into small groups now, and then also for you on YouTube to reflect or journal, whatever is meaningful for you, why I'm committed to anti-racism and what that means to you. So let's go for it. And we're going to have 10 minutes in these small groups.
So as people here on Zoom are going into breakout rooms, and if you are on Zoom and you see an invitation for going into breakout room, just do join breakout room, accept that invitation. But as they do, we know that there are a lot of people also watching on YouTube, and you too are invited to take part in this exercise. So you may be by yourself, or you may be next to somebody watching with somebody. And the question for reflection for everybody here is why I'm committed to anti-racism and what it means to me. It may be that this is something you've thought about internally, but have not put into language, words, said out loud to somebody, or maybe it's been a while, or maybe there's something fresh and new coming up. So this is the conversation. If you're at home watching on YouTube next to somebody, have that conversation with them. Why I'm committed to anti-racism and what it means to me. If you are watching on YouTube by yourself, the invitation is to take out a paper or type on your computer the answer to your answer to why I'm committed to anti-racism and what it means to me. We're going to be in this space. The people here on Zoom are in breakout rooms until about 8:40, about 7 minutes from now. So this is just the question for reflection. So if you are watching on YouTube, find a way to get with that question, to connect with that for yourself in a way that is true and powerful for yourself. Why I'm committed to anti-racism and what it means to me. Just practicing it, getting clear, integrating in it, because we're going to be talking about action and resources toward the end of this hour. But those those will just be words unless you've really gotten clear for yourself, your own motivation, your own values, your own commitments. So take a risk, try it out, say some things out loud that you mean from the heart. Why I'm committed to anti-racism and what it means to me. We know that dozens and dozens of people are watching on YouTube right now and are not able to be in these breakout rooms here on Zoom. So that's just the invitation. If you are in the main room here in Zoom, you've probably received a breakout room invitation. So you can click the blue button, join breakout room, and that'll take you to a small group discussion. So you're invited to do that. Again, this will be repetitive for some folks who've been listening to me for a few minutes now, but we know that people are coming in and going out and joining and unjoining or getting distracted. So I'll just say what's happening now is between 8:30 and 8:40 in this hour. People here on Zoom are in small breakout room sessions of 3 people having conversations with each other. And we know that there are dozens and dozens of people who are watching on YouTube. And so the question for the next 6 minutes to reflect on is, why are you an anti-racist and what does it mean to you? Why are you committed to anti-racism and what does it mean to you? So if you are not in a breakout room right now on Zoom, if you are watching this on YouTube, you can take out a piece of paper. You can, if you're with someone else, you can say it out loud to them and really explore it, explore some new dimensions with them. Because as I say, toward the end of this hour, we're going to be talking about resources and action options. But if you can just kind of connect with your heart, and really get clear on this for yourself. If you are on YouTube, you can also talk with one another. The live chat on YouTube is a place to do that. So if you are one of the dozens of people watching on YouTube, go to the chat and reflect on this, and share with each other, talk with each other, engage with each other in that chat box on YouTube Live. Why I'm committed to anti-racism and what it means to me. We're going to be in that discussion space for about 4 minutes until about 8:40, just so folks know. And again, if you're just checking in, just tuning in, the invitation for the next few minutes, this is a reflection time in this hour, is to get clear for yourself on why I'm committed to anti-racism and what it means to me. That's the question for focus and reflection. Just for the next few minutes, we're going to move into resources and action, but now we're inviting you to engage with other folks, engage with yourself. You can, if you're on YouTube, putting it in the comments, the live chat on YouTube, engage one another, hear one another in that way. And folks here on Zoom are in different breakout rooms and talking with each other. And just to be a broken record, but I know people are coming in and dropping out and coming back in again. So this is the reflection part of this hour-long session. For the next couple of hours, sorry, for the next couple of minutes, breakout groups here in Zoom are going to be talking about the question, why I'm committed to anti-racism and what it means to me. If you're watching at home on YouTube, you can just share with each other there. Sounds like the YouTube thread is going well. So thank you for talking about that. All right, people are going to start coming back in from their breakout rooms. We're going to give folks just a minute or two to come back from the small group discussions. And from what I hear on YouTube, watching live, folks are really using that live chat to engage each other and learn from each other. So I really appreciate that. Glad you found each other. So important, supporting each other, encouraging, inspiring, strengthening each other, coming together in this way. We're just coming back here on Zoom from various breakout rooms where I know you all have been in conversation for the last 10 minutes or so. And we're going to be moving from reflection toward resources and action, but we're still waiting on people to come all the way back. Looks like everyone is back. I'm getting the word, so I'll pass it back to Chris and Ashley.
All right. Reverend Ashley, are you, I know you're you're a coworker, your 3-month-old coworker is here, but Reverend Ashley is going to help us do a little bit of sharing out.
Yep. We would love to hear from maybe a couple of folks in the chat. What are some takeaways? What did you hear from people? What are the whys that you heard from your comrades that are inspiring to you, that made you think a little bit deeper, or things that you want to share? And so we'll share a few of those verbally here. If you are willing to share in the chat with us some of what your conversation entailed. Why are you committed to being an anti-racist, to engaging in anti-racist praxis? As Chris said, this is an ongoing thing. So I see one here. I'm committed to anti-racism and what it means to me, to recognizing the full humanity in others, as well as expressing my humanity. My family and I can view each other through love. Chris, I'm going to turn it to you to read some of these because my coworker has.
Yes, absolutely. And I think Reverend Ashley's coworker there is encouraging us to be thinking about the future generations and what kind of a world and what kind of legacy we're leaving. And so this is an opportunity to practice I'm committed to anti-racism because, and this is what it means to me. And I encourage all of us to be able to practice speaking this in ways that we're able to talk about it with people in our lives. Again, too often the conversations about racial justice in white communities are white people who are against racism, who wait until racists take over the space and then respond to the racism, as opposed to proactively speaking about racial justice, anti-racist values and culture as a life-affirming, soul-nourishing, world-saving commitment. So we got some more here. I'm committed to anti-racism because I'm committed to human flourishing, and racism is one of the central anti-human forces that oppresses and kills people of color, but oppresses whites as well. I grew up in the 50s and was taught to be a white supremacist. I want to heal my soul. I'm committed to anti-racism because if we believe we are all made in God's image, there should not be a question as to worth of any person. I am afraid for my friends, their children, and my students. I'm committed to anti-racism because being Black or any color, ethnicity other than white should not be a crime or a death sentence. Embracing differences brings more beauty and seeing a more whole picture of life. I want to hear all voices. I fear for my grandchildren of color, and I know we are all in this together. I'm committed to anti-racism because I have many Black people in my life that I love, and I am fearful for them. I want to fight the systems of oppression we have built because I am ashamed by them. It means to deal with the ways profit and debt in American capitalism rely on and reinforce racism. And so I encourage all of us to, whether it's a journaling practice or talking with people in your life, but I was a part of an anti-racist group for a long time where we would practice with each other. How do we have different kinds of conversations with people in our life? And really trying to focus on how do we proactively bring these conversations up? Whether it's like, I just read this really powerful novel by Toni Morrison that just really blew my mind. And these are some of the things that were really meaningful for me about it. Or I want to share this poem with you that really moved me. Or, I'm thinking about Minneapolis right now and it's tearing my heart apart. And this is why. So being able to share with the way that we might talk about an amazing recipe that we just ate, or a movie that we saw, or some ways of just bringing this into our conversations and into our lives, but also being able to have that commitment to ground us, because part of that grounding is thinking about action. So these are some action steps that have come from lots of different groups who are organizing in Minneapolis, who are organizing around the country. The first two action steps are calling the mayor of Minneapolis, who has spoken publicly about the officers being arrested, but to continue to put pressure on from around the country and from within the Twin Cities. The phone number for the mayor in Minneapolis is 612-968. And if someone can put this in the chat, the number is 612-968-4443. But I also encourage everyone to call the mayor of Louisville, Kentucky, and demand justice for Breonna Taylor, that the officers be fired and charged with her murder. And that's Mayor Greg Fisher. And his number is 502-574-2003. And I'll put that in the chat. Thank you for whoever did that. I love that. The next is donating to Black Visions, which is a Black racial justice, Black liberation group in Minneapolis that is heavily organizing right now and has been doing work for a long time. The link for Black Visions Collective is right there to donate to Black Visions and also to encourage other people. So every time someone you talk to says, oh my gosh, this is horrible and what can we do? Or racism is terrible and it's so confusing and I don't know what to do. Immediate positive steps are making donations to Black-led, people of color-led racial justice organizations, making phone calls. They're initial steps that can lead to a marathon, a journey of racial justice work. But we need to offer people those initial steps. So donating to Black Visions, as well as donating to Minnesota Freedom Fund, which is raising bail money for everyone arrested who is protesting the murder of George Floyd, who is protesting for Black Lives Matter in the Twin Cities. And so if they are arrested, Minnesota Freedom Fund, which that link is now in the chat, they are helping to bail people out. Because we have to remember, this conversation, much of what we're talking about is the result of centuries of courageous Black liberation struggle, Black liberation leadership that has said another America is possible. Yes, there's the America of enslavement, of colonization, of white supremacist violence, the America of white families bringing their children to publicly watch and witness and celebrate Black lynching. There is that America, and there's also the America of multiracial movements with white people joining into those movements for collective liberation. And so Ann Braden is one of those white anti-racists, and her husband, Carl. Ann and Carl Braden. I encourage you to learn about Ann and Carl Braden, who were here in Louisville, Kentucky, because many of us right now are saying, I don't want my inner Amy Cooper to come out of anti-Black racism, not to individualize her, but what she's that symbolizing of that anti-Black fear of Blackness, calling the police against Black bodies, Black humanity. But we can also call forward our inner Ann and Carl Braden, white anti-racist, incredible leaders. So the next is Surge, a national network of white anti-racist organizations and leaders. Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice, is doing a national webinar tomorrow specifically on how white people can be taking action for Black Lives Matter and racial justice. And so we're gonna get that link up there in a moment of the Showing Up for Racial Justice Surge national webinar call that is going to be tomorrow. So encourage people to know. The other thing is, for those of you who are Unitarian Universalists, there's UU the Vote. And I'm going to see if Reverend Ashley is available, or if she's still in conference with her coworker.
Here I am.
No problem. So UU the Vote is a beautiful visionary effort to get Unitarian Universalists. And I encourage those of you who are in other faith communities or in secular efforts there's other opportunities, but UU the Vote, Unitarian Universalist is the association. UU the Vote is working to get UU congregations actively involved in helping to do voter registration, voter organizing, but not just in the kind of like, last weeks of the election, trying to like get some, but specifically trying to do work in white communities, those of us who are white Unitarian Universalists, to engage white voters and help flip votes that were Obama, that went to Trump, to flip those votes, but also engage white voters around racial justice voting in this election. But also those of you who are not Unitarian Universalists, showing up for racial justice, Surge, on the call tomorrow. But you can also just look them up on Facebook or on their website, Showing Up for Racial Justice. They are also engaged in a national voting drive to organize in white communities to move white voters to vote against Trump in this election, and to actively bring up racial justice, anti-racism, as white people connecting to white voters to help get more and more people to turn out against Donald Trump in November. So either UU the Vote as a really crucial for down ballot races of progressive candidates and racial justice candidates, as much as we can
Chris,
get.
can I say a quick thing about UU the Vote?
Please.
So one thing I want to say is that as a 501c3 organization, we are not doing partisan work, but one of the things we want to be clear about is that white supremacy is not a partisan issue, right? It crosses all of our lines, and it's incredibly important for us as liberal and progressive people, and for conservative folks, right? Like, all of us need to be doing this work together. So UU the Vote specifically, I want to give you a great example. Right now in Minneapolis, the ask that we're making of Mayor Fry about defunding the police, right? It comes down to who's on the city council and who our mayor is, right? So those are candidate things. There are also any number of nonpartisan races and issues on ballots that in moments like this become critical. So for example, another ask that's happening in Minneapolis right now is an ask of Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman, an elected official, to issue arrest warrants and press charges against the police officers who killed George Floyd. Mike Freeman is the same county attorney who 4 years ago was declined to continue forward pressing charges against the officers who killed Jamar Clark in our city, another Black man who was killed by the police. So this kind of thing matters, right? These down ballot races, which tend to be nonpartisan, this is the place where, when stuff like happened in Minneapolis this week goes down, it matters that we have done the work. The right has figured this out. If you stuff the dog catchers races and the Supreme Courts, even though those are technically nonpartisan races, you're going to end up with the outcomes that you want in a particular direction. And so what I encourage us to do, and what UU the Vote is encouraging us to do, is to get involved in really local ways and in nonpartisan ways, right? This is talking about values and not partisan politics, because these deep values that are bringing us together, this is why it's so important to be able to articulate those, as Chris encouraged us earlier. And so the ask for you is to get involved with UU the Vote if you are a Unitarian Universalist. We're going to be phone banking. Of course, we've shifted the way that we're doing things now in this COVID moment, but we're fostering spiritual resiliency. We're finding ways for folks to get involved. We're partnering with organizations led by local communities and folks who are on the front lines. If you'd like to be involved in UU the Vote, and I encourage you to text text Vote Love, one word, to 51555. So again, Vote Love to 51555. You can also go to uuthevote.org and sign up there for updates, and we will have ways that you can be of use from your own home, even if you are sheltering in place, in ways that will make a difference the next time this happens, right? The next time somebody is killed, the next time police officers are, the budgets are on the table. And so we're really, this is one strategy among many, but it's an important one right now.
The final action step for those of us who are Unitarian Universalists is to support the adoption of the 8th principle, which is a commitment. Unitarian Universalists have 7 principles that unite us. And the 8th principle is a commitment to the journey towards spiritual wholeness by working to build diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. So that 8th principle is going to help us now with our closing. That thinking about doing this work as a part of building beloved community. And I can imagine that each of us participating in this from wherever we are, including those of you who are participating through watching the recording, deeply in our hearts, in our souls, are yearning for, are starving for meaningful, beloved community that is felt and experienced, that we can taste, that we can breathe, that we can see. And white supremacy is fundamentally committed to preventing beloved community. One of the people in my small groups talked about the ways that segregation kept her from even knowing Black people in her life for so long. And that is not by accident, that is by design. And so when we think about anti-racism for those of us who are white, I want us to be able to think about as we close, why this is, someone said earlier about healing their soul, being raised to be white supremacists. And I would say that all of us who are white in this country, not because we woke up and said, I want to be a white supremacist today, but because of the very being white in a racist white supremacist society where the laws and the policies and the culture is anti-Black and anti-people of color, that all of us who are white have internalized white supremacist ways of being. And yes, there's introspection that must happen, and also external action to end those institutions, to end those policies, to get elected officials who are going to work for justice and to make change. So as we close, whether you want to put it in the chat, or for some of you who want to just unmute and say a word or two, but when you think about anti-racism, I think about, for white people, us getting free from the nightmare of white supremacy that positions us against the humanity of people of color, to get free from this nightmare. I mean, how many of you have been reading the news, have been watching, have been living in Minneapolis, living in the Twin Cities, living here in Louisville, and feeling the nightmare on our skin and our bodies and our minds and our nightmares? And so we want to get free and to be able to join in authentic, meaningful way with siblings of color, with Black siblings, with Indigenous siblings, to end this nightmare. So what I want you to do right now is in the chat, or just bring yourself out of mute for a minute and just say a word or two of why you want to get free from white supremacy. How would your life be better if we're able to end white supremacy and build beloved community? I no longer want to benefit from being white, to be closer to God, integrity. Let's hear a few more. And again, if 2 or 3 of you want to unmute and speak bring your voice into this space, to follow my moral compass, to decolonize my mind and heart, to live my social justice values, to have hope and love, life would be so much more joyful, to be fully genuine, to not live surrounded by fear, friends with different experiences than mine, a better place for my children, to have hope for my children, to be fully free. From YouTube, to have justice for all, to lead by a different viewpoint for our humanity. And I encourage all of us to continue to think about why you want to get free, why you want to get free from this nightmare. Because yes, it's crucial, absolutely crucial, that we become literate about white supremacist history, racist history, literate about the ways that white privilege operates, literate about the ways that we can try to remove and actively work day in and day out against anti-Black racism. And we need to become poets, artists, parents, lovers of racial justice in a way that we can bring more and more white people into this work because they see it as life affirming and soul nourishing and the way they want to be, because it is powerful, it is beautiful, it is the way to the future that we want. We need to make white people want to be anti-racist because it's the best way to be in this world. So it's up to us to help communicate that, to build a culture of resilient anti-racism and racial justice that actively brings in more and more white people. Because yes, some white people, if we say, you know what, you have white privilege and you're racist, they'll respond in a way that's like, okay, I want to understand that more. But for a lot of white people who feel the economic inequality of this system, who feel the depression and the alienation of this system, we also need to be able to speak to the pain that white people experience in this fundamentally dehumanizing society that, yes, positions white people above people of color, but it is a dehumanizing, fundamentally unjust, deeply unequal society. And we want more and more white people to realize that that depression, that alienation, that addiction, that anger and resentment towards people of color comes from a deep longing and starvation of their humanity that white supremacy has straitjacketed their hearts and their souls into. We want white people to get free from white supremacy, to embrace racial justice and collective liberation. And so with that, to read that we want a better world for our kids, for our communities, for our congregations, and to bring that energy with us, that we bring the energy of the heartbreak and the anger and the rage, and we also bring the energy of knowing that another America is possible, the other America of multiracial democracy, and that we can be a part of that. So thank you so much, Reverend Jake, for having the initial idea to make this space, for Reverend Meg, bringing your incredible leadership to the space that so many of us look to. And Reverend Jake, both you and Reverend Meg are just such incredible leaders that I know I and so many look to. And Reverend Ashley Horan is one of the most incredible anti-racist leaders in the Unitarian Universalist faith and in this country. And we need leadership that loves our people, that hates white supremacy, but loves our people, because we want to get free. So thank you for being here, being a part of this space. Let's do our work. Let's do our action steps. Let's build up an anti-racist culture of resilience and courage and life-affirming values. Let's join in Black liberation struggle and support in whatever way we can Black liberation movement on the streets of Minneapolis, on the streets of Louisville, on the streets all over this country, and get involved. But we want to get free. I don't want any white children to grow up not knowing that an anti-racist, feminist, social justice way of being is possible, for white children to only grow up seeing racists be the white people who speak about race. For all of our kids, for all of our futures, let's get free, let's end white supremacy in whatever way we can and do this together. Thank you so much. Love to you all. And in whatever way you want to share a final love, a wave of with your hands, with your body to speak into this, but let's end with some love. Thank you all.